One of the ways that I really recommend is for people to come together in small groups every week and make yourself a little group. And I think, Dean, don't you have a name for those groups? Do you have a name for groups
Yeah,
like that?
we call that safe circle.
Yeah. So your safe circle. So I call it a possibility team. It's the same thing, or a study group even. But the point is to find other people who are having the same kind of questions. And when we come together in our group every week, we start building the courage to ask those questions of each other or of ourselves, and to become aware of some of the potential, because it's so easy to see potential in other people. It's just not easy to see potential in ourselves. And so if we can come together in these groups, then you can look at, God, you have this potential. Can't you see that about yourself? Look what you can do. Look what you are. Look what you can say, and look what you're feeling. And I want to hear what you're feeling. And please tell me what you're thinking and feeling. And all of a sudden, there's this space that's a safe space, that is a sacred, safe space that you can have every week, in which you can unfold a little of this potential that you didn't even know that you didn't know about.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Our guest this episode of Poetry of Predicament podcast is the prolific author and facilitator, and as he might say, possibility manager, Clinton Callahan. He joins us to speak about being outrageously connected, inspired, and alive, even in the face of a predicament-laden world. Easily one of the most inspiring and engaged leaders I've ever met, this is a juicy conversation. Welcome, Clinton Callahan. So I'm just thrilled today on this episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast to have a gentleman that I got to meet about, 4 or 5 years ago. We were both on a trip to the Yucatan that was hosted by Gary Stamper and Carolyn Baker. And, I didn't know at the time just what a lovely trip that would be in every conceivable way for me. And I'm happy to hear your experience as well. The places we ended up staying and going were far better than if we had gone to the really big touristy places. So there was a magic in that. And in our tour guide, who was actually a ridiculously competent and deep shaman, young man in the center of the Yucatan. And I had the pleasure of meeting Clinton, and you had a real posse with you. You had a number of people who were evidently involved with your body of work, some of your trainers. And of course, that's what I want to dive into and hear about how everything's going with your projects now. And when I got to meet you, Clinton, I got to say, it had been a while since I had been working directly in the transformational training world, like with the EST training or what became the Forum and LifeSpring and a number of other transformational organizations that were kind of the early foundational experiences the lineage I grew up in. And there was a certain kind of quality of possibility, quality of conversation that where we would talk about, it was the water we swam in. So it was exciting and it was vibrant, and it was a way of having people from diverse backgrounds being able to work together in extraordinary ways. And now we live in a time where, depending on which marketing channel you're listening to, you can have transformational socks. So it's become kind of a diluted conversation. And what I discovered when I when I had the pleasure of meeting you and your team was that there was some of that vibrance that I hadn't felt in a while in your work. And I trust that it has continued because I continue to get your email updates, and they're always full of new and, again, vibrant ideas, actions, programs. So you're really keeping that flame alive, and so it's a pleasure to connect with you. It's been way too long, and I'm just going to leave it to you to introduce yourself, and as you would want to be introduced, um, and I think if you would just launch right into where you currently are and saying whatever you'd like to say for historical context, so people can understand the basis of your work. But I'll leave that to you, and really great to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. I was thinking while you were talking here how it was way back in 1975 when I was at the university studying physics, and I remember signing up at the university for something I really wanted to study. I sat down at the registration desk, and the lady said, "Well, what do you want to learn?" And God, nobody had ever asked me that before. I said, well, to be honest, I want to learn magic. I want to learn transformation and evolution stuff. I want to guide healing processes, and I want to do paraphysics and metaphysics. And she goes, "Hold on, we have physics." And so I signed up for physics. And after some years at the university, I realized I wasn't really learning what I came there to learn. And I got pissed off enough to put up a little poster on the wall and said that I'm not learning what I wanted really to learn. And anybody else who had the same thing going on, we could just talk about it and see what could come out of it. Well, 75 people showed up at this meeting, and I'd never given a talk before in front of a group. So I was pooping in my pants, it was really serious sweat coming out. And I don't remember what I said, but we started to meet once a week and doing experiments of the kind that in our case did not have to do with drugs and sex and rock and roll, even though this was back in the 70s. It was more expansion, awareness expansion exercises, and deepening our abilities to communicate and connect and be present and pay attention to our attention, and just whatever we could experiment with. And it was fantastic. And whatever worked, I just started. I have a kind of a neurotic little writing habit, and I just started documenting everything that worked. And it eventually, over the years, wherever I would move into a different city, I would always put up a little poster somewhere, something similar, and people would always show up. And over the years, this has developed into what's called possibility management. So when I got to Europe back in 1995, I was outside of the morphogenetic field of America. And when I would go into a liquid state of learning something wild, I didn't have to reshape back into being an American exactly. And since I was in Germany at the time, I couldn't become a German because I was too old. I wasn't a baby anymore. So I became more myself. I think that's what really happens for people. So out of that then emerged this first Expand the Box training back in 1998 in Hamburg. And since then, at the beginning, of course, I had to offer these myself because nobody else knew what I was talking about the distinctions, about how to become a source of possibility in my life and this service to other people and also to the village, whatever group I was working with. And this becoming a source of possibility, I thought was fantastic. At the same time, when I started introducing it to other people, I realized that there were handicaps, there were blocks, there were serious problems going on. For example, people didn't know how to feel. So, and people, if you don't know how to feel, because it's too frightening to actually feel, because the program from modern culture is that there's three bad feelings and one good feeling. You know, anger and sadness and fear are bad or negative, and that's the thoughtware that we get from modern culture. And in fact, being really extraordinarily happy is extra not allowed, because then obviously you're not paying attention to the news. You haven't read the newspaper. You're not taking life seriously, and you probably, you know, on drugs or childish or being irresponsible, or obviously don't have enough work to do. So being happy could almost be the worst of the four feelings to have. So we have this really high numbness bar from childhood on to block all this stuff. And so if the feelings are actually rocket fuel for delivering your archetypal lineage in the world, and if these are the information and energy you need to be present and interact, and it's blocked off, well, people can't be a source of possibility. So we ended up having to do a whole lot of research to get people into being adult and present. And so this is the bulk of the first part of possibility management, is getting people into adulthood and in presence. And that alone is significant. It's wildly successful and amazingly powerful. It's a totally different life experience to be out of the childhood ego state, or, you know, imitating our parents. And so for the first really 10 years of possibility management, that was so startlingly new that people didn't even know what to make of it. But in the last 5 or 6, 7 years, I think with the more awareness of global warming and these huge pollution problems and conflict problems, and the insanity of what kinds of people are voted into office at high levels of government, and these kinds of things, these shocking events are having people waking up more and more. And so as of now, some of the distinctions that we're writing into Sparks are being translated into 14 different languages, and there are trainers right now in 5 different countries, I think, starting to deliver expanded box trainings and possibility labs, and really providing this possibility management stuff for people and supporting their evolution, their evolution of consciousness in a big way. And it's just really exciting. You know, there's all this bad news about global warming and the lethal effects of our near-term future. At the same time, it's cracking the status quo in a way that nothing else can. And there's such an opportunity right now to take responsibility for your own evolution. So this is an exciting time to be alive.
Yeah. Well, I definitely got that in meeting you and your team, and just again want to acknowledge that it is a special language that you're speaking right now. And I think that I have some parallel from a different lineage, an ability to at least hear you. You know, I may not have had the identical experience by any stretch, but I think there's enough parallel that we can share some language here. And I don't know what your experience is, but one of the biggest challenges in being on what I consider to be the leading edge of the conversation of the collapse of Earth and human systems that we're in, we, for a number of different reasons, don't even have a language to talk about what's going on. If we were willing to talk about it, which collectively we're still not. And so to then get to this dimension you're talking about, which is growing and expanding that edge, you know, that experiential and that edge of possibility, that requires a language that we must share. And some overlap, some shareable experience, some mutuality of experience that we can then have together and then grow out into new possibility. I don't know if that sparks you to speak about the next chapter of what you'd like to say, but that's what.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I've had to give it a name, what we are. The people who go first, I've had to call us edge workers. You know, edge worker is the name. And I imagine the people listening to you and us now are edge workers. And if it really helps, I find, to have an understanding of a person who has the courage to admit that the experience of what I call modern culture, or the I also call it the standard human intelligence thoughtware that we're given by unconsciously by school and parents and media, that this if the person gets present enough with themselves and unhappy enough with that it will empower them to go to the edge of the existing field of awareness or thoughtware, and then stand there. You know, almost every day we're brought to that edge by shocking news of war or destruction of some ecosystem or something like that. But we bounce back usually reflexively back to the middle to be accepted by the ordinary. But more and more people are coming to the edge and being able to stand there. And when you stand at the edge of the culture, you realize it's a culture, and you realize it has an edge, which is, modern culture does not, it markets itself as the hottest thing that human beings have ever invented. And it's just crap, it's just really a marketing scam, because when you stand at the edge, you go, this is only one of the thousands of possible ways to be alive on the planet. And it's an unsuccessful way. It's a terminal way. And just because so many people have been hypnotized and zombieized into serving a game world for which they do not know the values, because we serve the values of every game world that we play in, whether it be banks or school or politics or the grocery store or the car, whatever game world we're playing in. We serve those values, and if you don't know the values of the game world that you play in, you end up being a zombie, really. And so to wake up from, God, I spent my whole life being a zombie, and now I'm at the edge, and now I have some choices I didn't have before, one of which is I can go back in and pretend like I didn't see the edge, or I can look out over the edge and, oh my God, look at, there's other cultures to look at. And so the building the bridges from the edge of modern culture to other cultures is called being a bridge builder and an edge worker. And I think that I used to think that speaking to the choir was a waste of time. Do you know what I mean by speaking to the people who are already converted or already awake? But I've changed my mind about that, because if there's anything I can do to empower the bridge builders to make them more effective at being able to speak about what they're doing or communicate about what they're doing or actually implement what they're doing, hey, the game goes up. It's really amplifies. And so that's what I've been doing lately is, for example, right now I'm in an eco village in the North Island, the north part of the South Island of New Zealand. It's called Tui Community, and they just asked us to come in and consider their context of their game world, to consider what they can do to upgrade their thoughtware and the way that they interact with each other so that they can actually be themselves more. And we just spent 2 days last weekend, and it was fantastic. And just a couple of weeks before then, we were in Germany at Zeg Community doing the same thing. And it's possible to take radical responsibility for the context of the culture or game world that you're playing in. And it's a fantastic work to expand your consciousness that way, to take responsibility that way. And it's my calling. It's basically my archetypal lineage puts me from project to project these days.
Right.
And that's what the kind of work that we're doing. And it's so great. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to rewind just a little bit and recap from my listening, because you covered a lot of ground that I'm seeing time after time for these past couple of years, in particular, since I published my first book in 2017, The Impossible Conversation. And it was, really the story of my woke moment and then vetting the information about how things are happening much more quickly and more intensely than we could ever imagine. And so what got us here and what's possible out in front. And what I've been seeing since then through the frame of the work that I've done for decades, which is some form or another of training or consulting, or in the corporate domain, in the organizational development domain, and then also working in personal development, and excellence and intimacy and so on. And what I've been seeing also is I always have a part of my attention on how's the dynamic here? How's the organization here? What's actually being expressed? What's perhaps in a way that you talk about with people, what's possible given what people have present. And I have a lot of compassion, and it's one of the tragedies that we're living in right now is that I get to meet many people who have deep and broad hearts, and they mean so well. They want to give into this, contribute in some valuable way in the face of the collapse of Earth and human systems and all the drama that's going on. And yet all we have is what we've been immersed in since birth in this culture. That's all the tools we ever got. And so what then happens is you take that beautiful heart that is just really cracked open in such a gorgeous way, and they're so clear they want to contribute. And out comes the shadow that is so pervasive that it now runs literally every part of the visible world that's going on. And it's also very much present at the individual level. And so I'm recapping this way because I want to be sure people who are watching, hear it in terms that they might be able to say, wow, my feelings have gotten hurt, or that relationship collapsed because of our discord or shadow or that sort of thing. And to just sort of stir up a listening for what you just laid out for us, what you and your team and your body of work represents, is perhaps there's a way, even though all I've ever known is this shadow-filled, addictive, automatic, and almost no possibility way of living. Maybe there's another possibility. So thank you for just sitting through that. I just wanted to recap it in a way that people might have heard it in a different and more engaging way. Please continue.
It's wonderful the way you just laid that out, because having been an edge worker for so long myself, I sometimes have to build the bridge backwards from where we are, and which is two ways. It's very exciting to actually realize there's so many other possibilities, and at the same time, it's not going to help me or anybody to get so far away from comprehensibility that nobody can follow. We have 108 websites right now that we're working on building to try to build bridges for people to get from where they are to something that is in some way respective, paying respects to the glory of being alive as a human being on Gaia, on the earth now. It's such an honor to have a life and to be given a planet with this level of consciousness that's available. And so some of the painfulness, the downtrodden, overwhelming, burdensome um, condition of life in modern culture, which we're so busy and so much in our minds so that it's so disconnected from our full potential as ourselves, that we don't even have a language for the underworld. We don't even have a language for the upper world. We just are just like succumb to this busyness of the middle world. And it's so overwhelming for us that it's funny, as I'm speaking, the light is coming out up over the hill and the sun is shining over here. No, but it's true. Okay, so like, it's like, um, uh, there's these distinctions that one can experience with a little bit of practice. You can notice that we are more than just our mind. Like you said, we have these huge hearts, so it's not a mistake from God that we have a heart and that it has feelings. And even though the modern culture leans on us to suppress everything, it's no wonder, because the clarity and power of our feelings is exactly the transformational force that will lead us out of the dark ages that we're in right now into some kind of um, um, what looks extraordinary, but is actually the basis of adulthood presence on planet Earth. It's like this. So I totally agree with what you just said in terms of where school leaves us in the face of a job and a debt, and trying to buy all the things that we're told that we need to have to survive in modern culture, and the oppression of the burden of thinking, well, God, if I just work my ass off for 40 years, then I can finally retire and start waking up and having a life. And it's so ridiculous. The whole thing is really ridiculous. And but okay, so how do you get from that, you know, so to something different? And one of the ways that I really recommend is for people to come together in small groups every week and make yourself a little group. And I think, Dean, don't you have a name for those groups? Do you have a name for groups
Yeah,
like that?
we call that safe circle.
Yeah. So your safe circle. So I call it a possibility team. It's the same thing, or a study group even. But the point is to find other people who are having the same kind of questions. And when we come together in our group every week, we start building the courage to ask those questions of each other or of ourselves, and to become aware of some of the potential, because it's so easy to see potential in other people. It's just not easy to see potential in ourselves. And so if we can come together in these groups, then you can look at, God, you have this potential. Can't you see that about yourself? Look what you can do. Look what you are. Look what you can say, and look what you're feeling. And I want to hear what you're feeling. And please tell me what you're thinking and feeling. And all of a sudden, there's this space that's a safe space, that is a sacred, safe space that you can have every week, in which you can unfold a little of this potential that you didn't even know that you didn't know about. So it's like becoming aware of what we didn't even know we weren't aware about in these circles. And that is so beneficial, because even these baby steps, these tiny baby steps, you make some baby steps once a week for a year, you're a different person, and you have whole new capacities and whole new potentials unfold in you. And that for me is the most fantastic way to do that, is to get together in small groups once a week and start asking the questions that people are not going to just criticize you and judge you and like think that you're crazy or something, but people are going to go, yeah, I had the same question. What can we do about this, or what can we try? And these small groups coming together like that is fantastic.
Yep. I'm with you completely, and that is why we put together the notion of safe circle, our particular way of talking about it. I'm sure that you have volumes and volumes of material and suggested activities and ways to build the skills and capacities of that kind of group all laid out. I certainly have my somewhat smaller library of potential
Well,
building.
while we're on that subject, I mean, people are welcome to go to possibilityteam.org, and it just has, there's a handbook there. There's a list of, I don't know, 100 kinds of activities that people can try. There's books and resources and videos to watch together and discuss, and they all build this stuff in us that holds consciousness, they all build this stuff in us that amplifies our ability to take responsibility. So, the thing is, modern culture is arranged to give us the illusion of being taken care of the police, the government, the school, the institutions are supposed to take care of us. And this is such a farce, because on the one hand, security doesn't exist in the world. I mean, one time I was on the phone call in Arizona. I was on the phone looking out my window, and I saw this cute little sparrow eating some little grains or bugs or something that was on my back porch, and I felt so peaceful and so happy that this little sparrow was just able to just enjoy himself safely on my back porch. And in the next instant, this hawk came and went, boom, grabbed that thing, broke his neck, and just took off. And I dropped the phone. I mean, my world was shattered. My entire life just like wait a minute, this is not part of the cartoon. This is not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And it's so true. We all have had experiences that life is not secure, and that it isn't really possible to be safe and still show up. You can try to hide out, and go in a cave somewhere and try to disappear or protect ourselves from those forces of evil that are just everywhere. But in fact, far more um, rewarding is a way of encouraging each other just to speak out and show up and stand up and take a stand for what we actually were born for. But it's these groups that do that. The groups will listen to each other, and the groups will say, yeah, do this a little better, like be more clear, like actually let your anger come out a little more, or let your sadness come up and say what you're really feeling about this. And then we'll help each other speak and share and show up more. This is nutrition. This is vitamins. This is this is empowerment in a whole other way, because we're all going to die one way or another. The end is known, and so what are you going to do before then is the question. So hiding out in a cave is one thing, and having a daring adventure is another thing. And so I just really encourage people to make it safe to be bold, to make it safe to be, what I mean is uncriticized, to actually take a risk, to dare to reach in yourself and find out what you were born for. I don't think you were born to wait around until you're retired and then you're so bored you just die, because you don't even know how to live. So when you don't have to work anymore, you don't have any idea what to do with yourself, and you just fall over from some disease. So there's so many possibilities that are right in front of us, right? Really, each moment in front of us. That, I mean, if you put me in line at the post office, or I'm talking to people. I turn around and I do experiments in line in the post office, and I say, look, I'm practicing making faces, or I need to make a presentation, or can I ask you a dangerous question, or God, I stand at the lines and I just don't know people, and we're in the same neighborhood. Could you tell me about yourself? Or there's so much aliveness possible in almost every opportunity that there is. So experimenting is really a big, for me, and experimenting in small groups is the best.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to stop there, just pause and explore there for a minute, because as much as this last year has been a pretty interesting year of apparent growth of some kinds of interaction and some kinds of awareness, and even possibly political orientation for people shifting. And that's what polls are saying. But what consistently, again, in these past roughly 5 years where I've been keeping track, the amount of people who don't interact, even with their own family and friends, the people, that the polls keep pointing to between 2/3 and 3/4 of us,
Whoa.
especially in the United States, do not have conversations of substance with even the people closest to them. Not to mention people in the mail, in the post office, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you have anything to share, because clearly a certain amount of your attention is on the cultivation of an engagement.
Hmm.
They may never reach your level, who knows? But you're clearly inviting people to a different way of deploying their attention and their presence in the world. And I'm wondering if you could speak to what you've seen with
Hmm.
people that you get to work with, or even people that you're having these random conversations with.
Hmm.
What are you left with what the real situation is with people? Could you give us your
Yeah.
perspective on that?
Yeah. The real situation is that we're inundated with images about how we're supposed to be, all the way from the superficial outer, how we're supposed to look, the clothes we're supposed to wear, the makeup, because we have these images from television or movies or from magazines, especially that are are dumped on us about how we're supposed to look on the outside, but then not only that, but how we're supposed to behave, even in intimate situations, in bed with somebody, or in sexual interactions, or in private spaces. We have all these television shows and these movies that are scripted and colored in all these in different kinds of ways, and this is our model for how to be. And so then what happens is this split inside of us. It's this incredibly painful and debilitating split between who we actually are and who we think we're supposed to be. And of course, we're going to try to be who we think we're supposed to be. For one reason, we try to be a good person, a good, or a good man or woman, or a good boy or girl, something like that, please the other people around us. And and while we do that, and the other reason is we try to be acceptable to those around us so that we fit in, so we get approval or acceptance or love or understanding. This love and acceptance and understanding is such a need for us. And so, but we think that we're taught the way we're supposed to do it, and we're shown by other people the way we're supposed to do it is to be like that, to be over there, to give this impression, to show that. So we have this split inside us between what we actually feel and think and are in there, which is uninspected for the most part, and this show that we put on that's just fake. And so this crack in us is terrifying. It's a terrifying crack between the show that we're supposed to put on, the image we're supposed to give, and what's really going on for us, which is mostly uninspected. It's mostly scary, but the crack is terrifying. And so it's far easier to not interact with somebody and have to put on this fake show, and we know it's fake. There's a part of us that knows that it's artificial and manufactured and not true. It isn't us. At the same time, we don't know the us that's inside to be able to take the risk of saying, hey, I'm here. I'm right here right now, and I feel scared, and I feel sad, and I feel angry, and I feel glad about these things. And I have this picture, and I want this. Like, one of the hardest things for us to say is actually, I want that. I don't want this, and I want that. We almost cannot say those things. We also these two words in our vocabulary that almost don't exist are no and stop. These words are almost not in our vocabulary because we're supposed to be yes or go along with, or to like be part of the crowd or the group. And so here we look around and go, oh God, look at all these people. They're all happy people. I'm the only one who's not happy because they're all pretending to be happy, and I don't really know what's going on for them, but they're just as scared as I am, and they're all putting on the show. So I try to put on the show. So it's better to hide out away from each other and just entertain our mind, in our intellect with media or music or something always going on in our mind, and not actually be present. So those people, the people, when I cannot, if I cannot be myself, then I cannot be with another person. And being with another person is one of the most rewarding possible things there is. But there's this gap in us between the show that we're trained to put on as a mask and as the illusion that we're happy, or that I know what's going on, or that I'm in control of my life, this illusion, when in fact the reality of it is so far away from that I don't know who I'm not in control of my life, and I don't know who I am. And so the gap is such a shocking, scary thing that we would just rather hide out. And it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't have to be that way. There's so many, there's more and more people taking the risk to like abandon the mask, abandon the show and the shell, and go through this scary part of trying to find out what's really just there. What's really, who am I really? And even if it's smaller, or it has pimples, or it's afraid, or it doesn't know, taking the risk of saying that, hey, I have pimples, I don't look really good, I don't know how to have sex in bed because I'm not like the sex movies, I'm not like the pornographic movies, I can't do that. But what I can be is present. I can be here with you, and hello, hello. And it's over and over again, going back to the simplicity of my own noticing what I'm noticing, and sharing that with another person, and finding people who are able, interested and able to just share what they notice, and notice what they notice and share with another person. This is so powerful and precious. And it sounds ridiculous almost. What are you noticing? Well, I noticed that the sun is shining in my face, or I notice that my voice is echoing in the room, or I notice that I'm sitting on a hard chair and it's not so comfortable, and I notice that I have so much that I want to tell you and I really care about, and you're listening to me. These are so important things. And this is the key. This is really, to me, it's the biggest key, is to realize the two things, and this gap in between, the show and who I really am, and this gap in between, and dare to come back into who I really am, even if it's not like so spectacular as like on the TV or in a movie, or so perfectly beautiful as the computer augmented graphics that we see everywhere. It's, hey, here we are, let's get real. And that's a fantastic foundation to stand on and be together. It's so rewarding and so possible. It's just so possible.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking us to that particular spot. I don't think we've ever really talked about kind of the layout that I use in my books and in my own body of work, but in this particular zone, I bet you it's pretty similar. I just find there's that preciousness you're describing by being truly present in the moment. It is the ultimate in simplicity. That's what the whole Zen thing's about, right? And I would just like to give you the short version of kind of what got us here, for my, in my jargon and so on, and just see if you could riff off that, and maybe just see what you're inspired to say. in writing The Impossible Conversation, I kept asking myself the simplest questions I could muster that went to as close to the center of what I was doing as I could, like what got us here? Once I established that what we're in is not just a bunch of problems, but actually predicaments, I started asking, so what got us here? Because this is insane. And every time I would ask that question, I would get one version or another of we've disconnected. We either disconnected from, and I just made a few categories just for ease of conversation, that we've disconnected from the primary sources of meaning in human life. That's deeper self, others, earth, and soul. Now, I'm sure that, 10 people in a room, you'd have 12 different ways of saying that with different categories. But, that was just what I came up with for workability. And the one piece of really good news that I found in this process is this crystalline, this absolutely ecstatic simplicity in the actual reactive reconnecting in any of those domains. It can look like, oh my God, yes, it's predicaments, we're all going to die, and everything's so complex, and there's never, all that. And again, the good news that I knew from my experience before, but before I didn't have the collapse of Earth and human systems breathing down my neck. But even now, with all that pressure, that sweet, simple truth is there every time I touch even a drop of that reconnection. So I don't know if that sparks you to say anything, but I wanted to kind of give you a sense of the words I often use and so on.
I have this picture that Gaia, which is the spirit of the earth, has been doing experiments the whole time to try to get an organism that is complex enough to become conscious of the consciousness that's in the field around all the time.
Mm.
And it's a dangerous thing for a planet to do, because if the initiatory processes that the two basic initiatory processes are avoided, then the organism can go off into its own ego, or its own like a separate reality from the earth and from the human, the life as an organism on a planet that's so interconnected and so interwoven and not independent. And the two initiations are, I am not my body. So the body is there, but the thing that's talking is not the body. The thing that's talking is the thing that is the consciousness that can be reflected or manifested through the body. And the other disidentification that's necessary as an initiatory process into adulthood is, I am not my mind. I am not my belief system. I'm not my self-image. I'm not my comfort zone. I'm not my worldview. And so that's the second initiatory process that is mandatory to become adult. And so these initiatory processes have been banned from society for about 5,000 years, ever since we started organizing ourselves in hierarchical structures. And the using hierarchical power structures in any kind of an organization is a terminal design error, because hierarchical structures can be hijacked by those who are best at doing whatever it takes to get a position of power in the hierarchy. And it turns out that the 3% of the human population that have a disconnect between their heart and their mind the sociopathic, psychopathic personalities, those are the style of personality that is most capable of doing whatever it takes to get power. So if you have a hierarchical structure in any organization, it will be hijacked by psychopaths, and that's what's happened to humanities organizations around the world, especially the last 50 years, have been completely taken over at the top levels by psychopathic personalities who have no agenda at all of creating a bright future for humanity. And so all of our supplications and all of our propositions and offers and proposals and requests and demands even that have an immense amount of research and intelligence for creating a bright future together um, don't cause any resulting change, because it's the hierarchical power structures only defending the psychopathic agenda, which is basically more power and more money and resources focused at the top, because the psychopathic personality is terrified. It's terrified of being discovered and terrified of being different and terrified of losing control, because if it doesn't have control, then it would have to be present, and presence is intolerable for a psychopath because they're disconnected from their own heart, so they have no capacity for being present.
Right.
And it's so visible. As soon as you know this, it's so visible in what we see. But yeah.
I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind exploring a little piece that I think might fit right in this spot in what you're laying out. Because as I lay out my version of that story, I bumped into, there's a lot of talk about how we're storytelling beings, and in the stories we tell ourselves and so on. And some of that I can kind of get, and it's strong, and some of it I haven't quite really understood or gotten, but that's a whole nother story. The piece that I want to run by you is, if a core narrative is an important part of the construct of our culture, let's just say for a moment that it is, I'm proposing that somewhere in the early to mid 20th century, we actually collectively forfeited our individual or familial or cultural core narratives, whatever we brought to the United States in particular, to be able to say, yeah, we did it like this in Italy, or this is the way my culture always did it, or whatever. And that especially people who are driven to succeed in the corporate model, that kind of thing, that what we actually replaced the ambient or the individual stories with is some version of the corporate charter. That really the only dynamic that was allowed, that has been allowed to be in the center of our culture, is you toe the line in the corporate structure, and your job is to provide profit for the shareholders, for the owners of the corporation, period. And if you're good at it, you get rewarded out the wazoo. And if you're not so good at it, you go further and further down the ladder until you're kicked out. And so I think that's one way of seeing this, what we see in the news daily about how many homeless people there are, people struggling, and everybody doing 80-hour weeks, and on it goes. And so what that does to me is it expands it from the 3% who are truly psychopathic, like, no question, that's a sick MFer, but what that inclusion of some variant of the corporate charter does, if that's workable, is it means everybody, whether they're conscious of it or not, is actually brainwashing themselves to be more and more functional in that story, in that narrative. And they know, if I do this, I'll be rewarded more. Anything else, and I will not be. So I don't know if that sparks you to say anything, but
The, even from the very first day of school, we're trained to give our authority away. And so one of the first things when I'm with groups of people, we start getting our center back, taking our center back. So it's our energetic center, and it's actually equated to our own authority. And so when you take your attention and put it on your energetic center and find out where you gave it, which is often, like you said, to a story that somebody else invented for their own benefit. You can take your attention and find your center wherever it is and use your intention and move your energetic center and put it on your physical center. Suddenly you have a different experience of yourself and you're connected to the world in a different way, and that's called being centered. So if you're a ballerina or a martial artist or an acrobat or something like that, then you know what it feels like to be centered. But the moment that you face another person, like a boss or somebody who's judging you or criticizing you or blaming you or insulting you, is so we haven't been trained to keep our center, even in the face of criticism or feedback or stories, meeting a person whose story is different from ours, who seems to have more authority than we do because they're backed by a bunch of other people who have their story. So this thing about being responsible for the stories that we hold and tell, we can take responsibility for that. And so do I have to have a story that matches your story? Well, there were 700 years of inquisitions that killed people who didn't have the same story as the Catholic Church. And so it took out a lot of people. And for 700 years, it's 30 some generations of people passed down. The mother said, the first thing you have to watch out for is what do the neighbors think, so that your story matches their story. And so we're deeply, deeply trained in imitating and matching the story that we see in the world around us as if it's a true story. But there's no such thing as a true story. How can there be a true story? It is all story. And so when you take your attention and put it on your center, move your center to your physical center and experience being centered, all of a sudden you have the capacity to create a different story. And not only that, you can have like a bubble of your own story culture, your own culture. You can invent the culture that you would love to live in, and you can live in that culture. And so people think, well, God, you can't really, because then you're isolated, or then you're just a crazy person, or then you're walking around in a bubble of your own culture. And I say, actually, we're doing that all the time already. We just don't know it. We just forfeit, like you said, our authority to standing in what we know is true and right and good for us, to a massively mediated and marketed stupid story about what a human being is. And then essentially it works to make us a slave in an economic system that has no future for the planet or anybody. So it's radical on the one hand to say, hey, that story doesn't apply to me. You can have that story if you want, but you can stand right across from somebody and say, God, that's an amazing story you have. You spend your time and energy trying to get money. What's money? Like what does that let you do? It lets you survive. I'd rather live rather than survive. So I invest in connections with people. I invest in love happening. I invest in creating possibility as a service for my community. And everywhere I go, there's more possibility and more love happening, and people shine more. So I kind of not interested in your story. Your world looks pretty dead and dry to me. It's like you're offering me sand and I'm thirsty. and you're going to offer me sand. Well, I'm not so interested in sand because I'm thirsty for something else. So you can have your sand, and I'll keep my love and exchange of being and presence and joy and empowering other people in their own potentials, and keep your sand. And so this is wild stuff to say, but it's so obvious. It's ridiculous. It's insanely inconceivable how people can buy into a story that's so unrewarding. And yeah, I want to be your slave. Give me a fake currency that's built on nothing, and I'll try to survive, and that's great for me. Forget it. Really forget it. Take that and shove it somewhere where there's no light, and I don't give a shit I don't care. I know enough people who are more interested in becoming alive and in creating, who work in circles. They do not work in hierarchies. They work in circles. You cannot have a psychopath in a circle. There's a website called taurustechnology.org, and it's just a meeting technology for people to work in circles and make decisions and create new stuff together, but working in circles. And it applies from everything from clubs to businesses to NGOs. Really, it applies everywhere. taurustechnology.org, and you've got a whole alternative system to the hierarchy that works way better because it uses group intelligence and it unleashes creative collaboration, and it's wonderful. So I think we're just at the edge of coming out of the dark ages, and this dominant story, like you said, is so unbelievable these days. It's so false. It's just it's the opposite of life. And why would you want to put your children in a school system that's going to brainwash and hammer them into verbal reality where they have to, defend their mind and shut off everything else, in the rest of their 5 bodies, as resources. We have 5 bodies, not just an intellect. Mm-hmm. And there's so much more possible in the world. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So let me do another one of those pause things that I did before.
These are great.
Because, I know you know this, but I just want to say it again for the folks that are watching. My experience of when you were talking about getting your start in transformational work, was roughly the same time as I was doing that, and it was exciting times. It was great work. I don't regret a moment of it, and so on. But the thing that I know is that it was a different time in our culture, and it was all the participation in that work was discretionary. And for some reason, there was a critical mass of people who said, "Yeah, I'll spend money and spend a couple of weekends, and I'll do that. And then I'll go do the advanced work that they offer. Yeah, I'll keep spending money and keep volunteering my time and blah, blah, blah." And that was what made it all work, all the particular lineage I was on. Mm-hmm. And the part that I wanted to pause and really shine a light on, again, what you just said, that now it ain't discretionary. Mm. Now I think I'd be amazed if you weren't in the same mindset of seeing like a tsunami of people waking up and realizing, take any young person who's thinking about college, and it's just the first 30 seconds of the conversation of, do I want to get $150,000 in debt for the unlikely possibility that I'll actually find a job that will allow me to pay off that debt? And wait a second, aren't there 16 different things I know about that are making it unlikely that life will be the same that it was for my parents for me in 10 years? Everything's looking worse. So that kind of thought process is dawning on people, no matter where they are on the spectrum of ever having heard of anything transformational or doing any personal growth work, or no matter what their political orientation, it's really down to a, wait a second. Which up till now, just even saying, wait a second, was heresy. You know, families would freak out and explode about, wait a second, what are you trying to stop us for? We need to get you on that train. And I'm seeing, especially in the light of the way you just said it, what we're looking at is, especially in the privileged and developed countries like the States, it ain't so privileged anymore. There's some questions being thrown in that all of a sudden people who would usually be right on track and pushing ahead and doing the whole corporate track are indeed pausing and taking a moment. And what better staging for exactly what you're describing in your body of work.
Yeah, our job is not to fight the system. We don't have to fight the system. You know, this is from Buckminster Fuller, but
right.
Our job is you don't change things by fighting the existing game worlds. You change things by creating the game worlds that make the existing game worlds irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And so it's such a creative power, and the whole what you're talking about is I'm like what I want to say is I encourage people to trust that wait a minute thing. You know, to hold on just a second, like really to trust that 1,000%, because it's not off, it's not wrong, it's not stupid, it's not crazy. It's a wake up call that will, you know, send you off into a different track. You know, and this track here is predictable. It's like we know the linear life plan. You know, you end up in a grave, and the life before then is really a lot like being in the grave anyway. So it's a desperate kind of life, and there's all these branch points where you can go off and live in a completely different way and abandon the system. And as there's really, you know, I got rid of my American passport. Really, I got rid of it. And there's so many people getting rid of their American passports right now that they raised the price on it to try to inhibit people from getting rid of your passport. But it's like the people, you know, if by abandoning the illusion of supporting the mainstream game world, by abandoning your fear of that and just go, wait a minute, no, you know, no, there's something else. If you just trust that, really trust that thing, even if you don't know what it is, and then get together with people who are going, hey, wait a minute, you have a hey, wait a minute circle, you know, and go, hey, look it, you're not crazy. What is it you actually want to do? What is it you actually turns you on? What is it that makes sense to you actually? And that empower that in each other.
Yeah. Well, Clinton, I can feel the envelope of our time is coming to a close, and I'm sad about that, because I could definitely talk for days with you, and it's just so much fun. It's always such a deep, juicy pleasure to speak with you. I'd like to just recap a couple things, and actually, before I do that, full disclosure, I thank you so much for sending the information about the Expand the Box trainings, which is the kind of the entry level exposure to your work that people will find. And I'm going to ask you in just a moment to remind us of the websites and so on, and I'll be sure to post those things both on the screen and also in the show notes when I post this episode of the podcast. But I just wanted to do full disclosure that I'm going to get myself to one of the Expand the Box programs here in Southern Oregon. There happens to be one coming up in a couple months, so I'm very, very happy about that. And again, just really thrilled that we've finally reconnected. And I really just hope against hope that this is not our last time we get to talk. I'd love to make this a regular session if you're up for it. But if you wouldn't mind, if you could just run by us one more time some of the entry level places where people can find more and more information about what you're up to?
One of the great ways to learn, get inspired to do experiments on an ongoing weekly basis is called sparkexperiments.org. And these are every week is a 1 or 2 page, couple pages of a distinction, a powerful distinction, and then some notes, and then some experiments to try. And those daily experiments just unleash this potential in you that you maybe didn't even know that you had. But it's all these hidden potentials in human beings get unleashed by doing experiments. And these are sparkexperiments.org. So this is a wonderful email program you can sign up, and it's even in some different languages. So that's fantastic. So I'm trying to spread that around as an entryway. There's another website called distinctionary.xyz. So it's distinctionary, just like dictionary, but distinctionary.xyz. People say they read this thing and their lives change because they just get new ways of thinking about things they never thought of how to think about. So it's a very fun and exciting online resource. The main website for connecting to this field of possibility management is possibilitymanagement.org. And it talks about what possibility management is and the trainings, and the calendar has a calendar, and it has all kinds of support for that. And the other one that's great is, I mentioned before, the possibilityteam.org website is abundant and rich with possibilities for what ways to interact and support each other in small groups in a weekly meeting. It's a fantastic resource. And
that was possibilityteam.org.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and there's another project, like I said, these 108 websites that we're working on solely over here to load up with as much as we can. It's just beginning now, so that it's not so populated yet, but it's great to get in early on this. It's a massively multiplayer online and offline personal transformation game called startover.xyz is the website for that. And one that's in there is it's a bunch of bubbles, and you click on the bubbles, and on top is called Spaceport, and it's a kind of a library of the different websites, easily to see. So those are some resources that we're trying to get out to people, because the revolution is inside. The revolution is in yourself, and the joy of that, and I know the joy of that. And the biggest joy for me is for people to turn on about themselves and what's possible for themselves. It's so wonderful when people go, really, I can do this, and I'm that, and God, this is in me, and well, here we go. And so this is so wonderful, and I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. The stand that you've taken in the world that something else is possible is completely in alignment with the Dean Walker that I know. So
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Clinton, just your last comment there, and I do let that in, and I do thank you for that. And I want to really turn it toward you as well. There's I am guessing that you surround yourself with people who have the ability to see you and see each other and see themselves through a frame of possibility. So I am assuming that you are seen plenty. So, but just in case there's a little spot, I just want you to know that I see you and I appreciate you, and I'm hard pressed to imagine a more important body of work at this remarkable time in human history Thank you so much. And please pass on my love and appreciation to your team. And I really look forward to being exposed to your work in a couple months. Thanks for being with us here.
Great. We'll talk to you again soon then.
All right, brother. Bye. Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.